What if I told you that you chose how you will die? Not consciously, not with your rational mind sitting down and selecting from a menu of death options, but with your soul, before you were born, before you took your first breath in this body. What if your death, the exact circumstances, the exact timing, the exact way you will leave this world was carefully chosen by your consciousness before you incarnated? Chosen not randomly, not cruelly, but with profound purpose. Chosen as part of a sacred contract between your soul and the universe. What if the child who dies at 5 years old chose that death? What if the person killed in a car accident at 30 agreed to that exit before they were born? What if the 90-year-old who passes peacefully in their sleep planned that exact departure decades before it happened? This idea terrifies most people. It seems to suggest that tragedy has meaning, that suffering is chosen, that the universe is not random but orchestrated in ways we don't understand. And if you're operating from ego consciousness, from the limited perspective of your current personality, this idea is unbearable. But what if you're not just your personality? What if you're an eternal soul that has lived countless lifetimes? And what if, from that larger perspective, death is not a catastrophe but a doorway, not an ending but a transformation, not something that happens to you but something you actively choose as the final lesson of this particular incarnation? For over 40 years, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, conducted thousands of readings while in a trance state. He accessed what he called the Akashic Records, a cosmic library containing every thought, every choice, every life that has ever existed. And through these readings, he revealed something that challenges our fundamental understanding of death. He revealed that your soul chose how you will die, before birth, with purpose, with wisdom, with love. Today, you're going to learn why your soul made this choice. You're going to discover the 3 types of death experiences and what each one teaches. You're going to understand how seemingly random tragedies are actually carefully planned catalysts for spiritual evolution. And you're going to see death not as something to fear, but as the final sacred act of a soul completing its mission. By the end of this video, you will understand death differently than you ever have before. You will see the purpose behind tragedy. You will recognize the wisdom in timing. And you will begin to live without the crushing fear of mortality that imprisons most of humanity. So let me ask you directly. Are you afraid of death? Are you terrified of how it might happen? Of when it might come? Of the pain, the loss, the unknown? Because for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to show you that your fear is based on misunderstanding. That death is not random, that it's not cruel, that it's not meaningless, that your soul already knows the way you will die. And it chose that death with more wisdom than your conscious mind can currently comprehend. Let's begin by understanding the cosmic library where all of this is recorded. The Akashic Records, where your death is already written. Before we can understand how your soul chose your death, we need to understand the Akashic Records. This is the source of Edgar Cayce's most profound revelations. The cosmic database where every life, every death, every choice is stored. Imagine a library that exists beyond time and space. A library that contains not books, but living records. The complete history of every soul that has ever existed. Every thought you've ever had. Every word you've ever spoken. Every life you've ever lived. All stored as vibrating patterns of energy and information. This is the Akashic Records. And according to Cayce, when he entered his trance state, This is where his consciousness traveled. He could access these records for any individual, reading their past, lives, their current life patterns, and yes, the death they had chosen for this incarnation. Casey described the Akashic records not as static information, but as a living, interactive field. When he accessed someone's records, he saw their soul's history like watching a movie. He saw the patterns, the lessons learned, the lessons still needed, and he saw the death that had been chosen as the final teaching of this particular life. But here's what's crucial to understand. The Akashic records are not a book of destiny that cannot be changed. They're more like a GPS system. Your soul programmed the destination before birth, but you have free will in how you get there. The choices you make, the paths you take, these can alter the journey. But the endpoint, the death you chose, this remains constant. Why would your soul choose your death before you were born? According to Casey, because death is the most profound teaching moment in any incarnation. How you die? When you die, the circumstances surrounding your death, these create ripple effects that serve both your own soul's evolution and the evolution of everyone connected to you. Your death is not the end of your story. It's the conclusion of a chapter, the final punctuation of a specific life lesson. And just as a skilled writer chooses exactly how a chapter should end to create the right impact, your soul chooses exactly how this life should end to create the right growth. Let me give you an example from Casey's readings. A woman came to him devastated by the death of her teenage son in a drowning accident. She wanted to know why. Why her son? Why so young? Why such a terrible way to die? Casey accessed the Akashic records for both the mother and the son. What he revealed was extraordinary. In a past life, this mother had been a ship captain who had lost crew members in a storm at sea. She had never forgiven herself. She carried the guilt across lifetimes. In this incarnation, she needed to learn that some deaths are not preventable, that she couldn't save everyone, that release and forgiveness were necessary for her soul's progress. Her son, in his soul contract with her, had agreed to die by drowning while young, not as punishment, not as cruelty, but as a teaching, to force his mother to confront the exact guilt and powerlessness she needed to heal. His death was his gift to her. A painful gift, yes, but a gift nonetheless. The son's soul, according to Casey, had already completed most of its learning. It needed only a brief incarnation to tie up a few karmic threads. 16 years was enough. And by dying in the manner he did, he catalyzed profound transformation in his mother and everyone who knew their family. This is the level at which the Akashic records operate. Not simple cause and effect, but complex, multi-layered soul contracts that span lifetimes and involve multiple souls working together for collective evolution. Your death is recorded in the Akashic records, not as a tragedy, not as random misfortune, but as a carefully chosen exit that serves your highest growth and the growth of everyone your death will touch. Why the soul chooses death? Purpose beyond understanding. Now that we understand where this information is stored, we need to understand why. Why would a soul choose its own death? What possible benefit could there be in selecting tragedy, pain, premature ending? According to Edgar Casey, the soul has an entirely different perspective on death than the ego does. The ego, your current personality, sees death as the ultimate enemy, the worst thing that can happen, something to be avoided at all costs. But the soul sees death as a doorway, a transformation, a graduation. The soul knows it's eternal. It knows that this one life is a brief experience in an infinite series of incarnations. From that perspective, death is not an ending, it's a transition. Like finishing school and moving on to the next level of education. The soul chooses its death for several specific reasons. First, karmic balance, not punishment. This is crucial to understand. Karma is not about cosmic revenge. It's about experiencing the full spectrum of human existence to develop complete understanding and compassion. If in a past life you were wealthy and looked down on the poor, you might choose an incarnation where you die in poverty to understand what you judged. If in a past life you were violent, you might choose to experience violence to understand its impact. If in a past life you abandoned your children, you might choose to be a parent who loses a child to understand the pain you caused. This isn't punishment. This is education. The soul is trying to become whole, complete, fully conscious. And that requires experiencing all aspects of existence, including death in its many forms. Second, soul group evolution. Casey taught that we incarnate in groups. The same souls return together lifetime after lifetime, playing different roles. In one life, you might be parent and child. In the next, you might be best friends. In another, you might be enemies. These soul groups have collective missions, and sometimes one soul agrees to die in a specific way to catalyze growth for the entire group. The death becomes a teaching moment not just for the individual, but for everyone connected to them. A young person dies in an accident, and their organ donation saves 5 lives. That death was chosen not just for the individual's completion, but to give 5 other souls the gift of continued life. The ripple effects are calculated at a level far beyond what we can perceive. Third, rapid soul evolution. Some souls choose very difficult circumstances, including difficult deaths, because these experiences accelerate spiritual growth. A lifetime of suffering can teach more than 10 lifetimes of ease. A tragic death can catalyze awakenings in dozens of people that would take decades to achieve otherwise. Advanced souls, according to Casey, often volunteer for the hardest assignments. They choose to incarnate into war zones, into poverty, into bodies that will fail early, not because they're being punished, but because they're ready for advanced curriculum. They're the spiritual equivalent of students who skip grades because they can handle more challenging material. Let me tell you about a case Casey documented. A child born with severe disabilities, unable to walk or speak, dying before age 7. The parents asked Casey, "Why? What did our child do to deserve this?" Casey's reading revealed that this soul was highly evolved. It had nearly completed its cycle of incarnations. It needed only one final lesson: complete humility and dependence. It needed to experience powerlessness to balance lifetimes of power. But more importantly, this child's incarnation was a gift to the parents and the community. Every person who cared for this child, who showed compassion, who had their heart opened by this vulnerable being, those people were learning lessons they desperately needed. The child's difficult life and early death catalyzed spiritual growth in hundreds of people. The soul chose 7 years in a disabled body and a gentle death as its final act of service before graduating from the cycle of rebirth. This is how the soul thinks. Not how can I avoid suffering, but how can I maximize growth for myself and others? Not how can I live as long as possible, but how can I use my life and my death to serve the highest good? Your soul chose your death with this level of wisdom. even if your conscious mind can't understand it, even if it seems tragic or unfair or too soon. Your soul knows. And one day, when you transition, you will remember why you made this choice. The three types of death, understanding your soul's choice. Edgar Cayce identified three distinct categories of death experiences in his thousands of readings. Each type serves a different purpose. Each one teaches different lessons. And understanding which type of death your soul chose can help you live more consciously now. Let's explore each type in depth. Type 1. The completion. Death. This is the death that comes when a soul has accomplished everything it intended to accomplish in this particular life. The mission is complete. The lessons are learned. There's nothing left undone. And the soul gently exits, making room for the next phase of its journey. People experiencing completion deaths often show specific signs in the months or years before they die. They begin tying up loose ends without consciously knowing why. They reconnect with old friends. They heal relationships that have been broken for years. They give away possessions. They share wisdom with younger generations. They're preparing. Not because they consciously know death is coming, but because the soul is orchestrating completion, getting everything in order before the departure. Casey documented a phenomenon he called the gathering that occurs with completion deaths. In the final weeks or days before death, family members who live far away suddenly feel compelled to visit. They don't know why. They make plans to come home for no particular reason, and they arrive just in time to say goodbye. This is the soul of the dying person calling its tribe together, orchestrating one final gathering before the transition. It happens too consistently to be coincidence. The actual death in completion cases is usually peaceful. The person might die in their sleep, or they might have a brief illness that allows time for goodbyes, or they might simply decide it's time and let go, the way you close a book when you've finished reading it. There's often a sense of rightness to these deaths. Even in grief, people say things like, she lived a full life, or he was ready, or it was his time. Because at a soul level, everyone involved recognizes that completion was achieved. One of the most moving completion death stories in Casey's readings involved a 92-year-old man who had outlived most of his generation. About 3 months before his death, he started giving away his possessions, very specifically. This goes to my grandson James. This goes to my friend Robert. This painting goes to the museum. He wrote letters to everyone he loved, thanking them for their role in his life. He spent hours with his great-grandchildren, telling stories, passing on wisdom. He visited places that had been meaningful to him, as if saying goodbye to locations as well as people. And then, on a Sunday morning after breakfast with his family, he said, I think I'll take a nap. He went to his room, lay down, and died peacefully in his sleep. His family said they weren't even surprised, because he had been saying goodbye for months in ways that felt intentional. His soul knew, and it prepared everyone for the transition. If you or someone you love is showing these completion signs, it's not morbid to acknowledge it. It's sacred. It means the work is done, the life was well lived, and the soul is ready to graduate. Type 2. The catalyst death. This is perhaps the most difficult type to understand, but according to Casey, it's also one of the most spiritually advanced choices a soul can make. Catalyst deaths appear tragic, premature, unfair, a child dying of cancer, a young parent killed in an accident, a brilliant artist taken too soon. These deaths make no sense to the rational mind. They feel like cosmic injustice. But Casey taught that these souls, often highly evolved ones, choose early or traumatic deaths not for their own growth, but as catalysts for the transformation of others. They're willing to sacrifice a long life in this incarnation to serve as awakeners for the souls around them. Think about how death transforms people. How many times have you heard someone say, "My child's death changed me completely. I became a different person. I found my life's purpose in their loss"? That transformation was the entire purpose of the death. The soul that died agreed to that sacrifice before birth. It said, "I will live only a brief time. My death will devastate my parents, but that devastation will crack them open. It will force them to question everything, to seek meaning, to find their spiritual path. My brief life and painful death will catalyze their awakening." This is not cruel. This is profound love. It's a soul saying, "I love you so much that I'm willing to play the most painful role imaginable in your life story to ensure your spiritual evolution." Casey documented the case of a young woman named Sarah who died at age 23 in a car accident. Her mother was destroyed by grief. She couldn't understand why her vibrant, beautiful daughter was taken so young. Years later, the mother came to Casey for a reading. He accessed both her records and her daughter's. What he revealed transformed the mother's understanding of everything. In a past life, this mother had been spiritually gifted but had used her gifts for manipulation and control. She had abused power. And in this life, she needed to learn humility, service, and genuine compassion. But she was on track to repeat the same patterns. Success was making her arrogant. She was heading toward the same spiritual failures. Sarah, her daughter, was an advanced soul who had already learned most of her lessons. She needed only a brief incarnation, and she agreed to die young and tragically to shatter her mother's ego, to break her open, to force her to develop the compassion and humility she desperately needed. The mother's grief drove her to seek spiritual answers. She began studying, meditating, serving others. She started a grief support group that helped hundreds of people. She developed genuine humility and compassion. She became the person her soul needed to become. And all of this was made possible by her daughter's willing sacrifice. Sarah chose 23 years of life and a sudden death as her gift to her mother, as the catalyst that would ensure her mother's spiritual evolution. When the mother understood this through Casey's reading, her grief transformed. She was still sad. She still missed her daughter. But the crushing weight of meaningless tragedy lifted. Because she understood Sarah's death had profound meaning, had served the highest purpose, and that Sarah's soul had agreed to this role out of pure love. Catalyst deaths often inspire movements, organizations, changes in laws, awakenings in entire communities. One person's death becomes the spark that lights fires in hundreds or thousands of souls. If you've experienced what seems like a senseless death, consider the possibility that it was actually a catalyst death. That the soul who died made that choice to awaken you, to transform you, to force you to become who you needed to become. Type 3. The liberation death. The third type of death is what Casey called liberation death. This is when a soul chooses extremely difficult circumstances, often including a challenging illness or disability, specifically for accelerated spiritual growth. The death at the end of this difficult life is experienced not as tragedy, but as joyful release. A return home after a hard mission. a celebration. Liberation deaths often follow lives of significant physical or mental struggle, chronic illness, severe disability, circumstances that would seem like curses to most people. But according to Casey, advanced souls sometimes choose these conditions deliberately because they create optimal environments for rapid evolution. Suffering, when approached consciously, burns away karma faster than almost anything else. It forces humility. It develops patience. It cultivates compassion. It strips away ego. It teaches surrender. These are advanced spiritual lessons that can take many lifetimes to learn in easier circumstances. So some souls say, I'll do it the hard way. I'll incarnate into a body that will struggle. I'll experience pain, limitation, dependence, and I'll use these conditions to accelerate my growth. Then I'll exit, and that exit will feel like liberation, like a prisoner being released, like a student graduating with honors after the hardest curriculum. Casey documented many cases of people with severe disabilities or terminal illnesses who, as death approached, exhibited what he called the lightning. They would suddenly become peaceful, even joyful. They would speak of feeling free, of seeing beauty, of understanding the perfection of their journey. One case involved a woman who had lived with severe rheumatoid arthritis for 30 years. Her body was twisted and painful. She couldn't walk, couldn't dress herself, lived in constant physical discomfort. But in the final week of her life, something shifted. She became radiant. She told her caretakers, I chose this. I know that now. I chose this body, this pain, this experience. And it taught me everything I needed to learn. I'm graduating. I'm going home. And I'm so grateful. She died peacefully, with what witnesses described as a smile of pure joy on her face. This is liberation death, the soul completing a difficult assignment and experiencing the transition not as loss but as victory, as earned rest, as a return to wholeness after a period of deliberate limitation. If you or someone you love is living with severe challenges and approaching death, understand that this might be a liberation death. The soul chose these circumstances, used them for growth, and the death will be experienced as freedom, as coming home, as the reward after hard work well done. Understanding these three types of death helps us make sense of what otherwise seems random. It shows us that death, in all its forms, serves purpose, teaches lessons, catalyzes evolution. Your soul chose one of these three types before you were born, and living with that awareness changes everything. The moment of death, the great remembering vivu voce, explored why the soul chooses death and the three types of death experiences. Now we need to understand what happens at the actual moment of transition. Because according to Edgar Casey, something extraordinary occurs, something he called the great remembering. In your last conscious moment in the physical body, the veil lifts completely, and you remember everything. You remember all your past lives. You remember the soul contracts you made before birth. You remember choosing this life, this body, these parents, these challenges. You remember selecting the exact death you're now experiencing. And in that moment of total remembering, there is no fear, no resistance, no feeling of injustice or tragedy, only recognition, only understanding, only a deep sense of, oh yes, this is exactly what I planned, this is perfect. Casey described the great remembering as the moment when the soul's perspective becomes fully conscious. During life, we're limited by the brain, by the ego, by the body's perceptions. We see only the surface of things. We can't access the deeper patterns and purposes. But at death, those limitations dissolve. Consciousness expands. And suddenly you see the entire tapestry instead of the single thread you've been focused on. You see how your death fits into the larger plan, how it serves not just you, but everyone connected to you, how it's the perfect conclusion to this particular chapter of your eternal existence. One of the most compelling cases in Casey's readings involved a man dying in what appeared to be a random accident. He was hit by a car while crossing the street. In his final moments of consciousness before impact, according to witnesses, his face changed. He smiled. He seemed to see something no one else could see. Later, Casey accessed this man's records and described what happened in those final seconds. The man's consciousness had already begun transitioning. He saw his deceased wife and son waiting for him. He remembered that he had chosen this death at this time, in this way. He understood that his sudden exit would bring his scattered family together in ways that nothing else could. He saw the perfection of it. And he stepped into that car's path, not out of carelessness, but out of soul-level recognition that it was time. That this was the exit he had selected, that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. The witnesses saw a smile because in that moment, the man was experiencing not tragedy, but reunion. Not random death, but orchestrated completion. This is what the great remembering provides. It transforms what looks like tragedy from the outside into recognition and even joy from the inside. Think about near-death experiences, people who were clinically dead and then revived. Consistently, they report that during their time dead, they experienced total understanding. They saw their whole life in review. They understood the meaning of everything. They lost all fear of death because they remembered that death is not an ending. These people have touched the great remembering and come back. And it changed them forever. Because once you remember that death is chosen, that it serves purpose, that it's a doorway, not a wall, you can't unknow that truth. Casey taught that we all experience the great remembering at death, even if it's only for a split second of earth time, even if our transition appears sudden or violent from the outside. In that moment of crossing, the soul remembers. And that remembering brings peace. This is why so many people who are present at deaths report that the dying person in their final moments seems to relax, to let go, to almost welcome what's coming. They're experiencing the great remembering. They're seeing what the living cannot see. They're understanding what the living cannot yet understand. Your death, when it comes, will include this moment. This lifting of the veil, this total recall of your soul's plan and purpose. And in that moment, all fear will dissolve. Because you'll remember that you chose this, that it's perfect, that everything is unfolding exactly as your soul intended. Living with the knowledge, how this changes everything we've journeyed through. Edgar Cayce's teachings on how the soul chooses death. We understand the Akashic records. We know the reasons for these choices. We've explored the 3 types of death. We've learned about the great remembering. Now we must address the most important question. What do you do with this knowledge? How does understanding that your soul chose your death change how you live? For many people, the first reaction to this teaching is resistance. I would never choose cancer. I would never choose to lose my child. I would never choose to die young. This can't be true. But remember, your current personality didn't make these choices. Your soul did. From a perspective that sees 1,000 lifetimes instead of 1. From a vantage point that values growth over comfort, Meaning over longevity, evolution over ease. Your ego wants a long, comfortable life. Your soul wants a meaningful life. And sometimes meaning requires difficulty. Sometimes growth requires loss. Sometimes the most powerful teachings come through the hardest experiences. So, how do you live when you understand this? First, you stop living in fear of death. Not because you're denying mortality, but because you understand that death is not random. It's not cruel. It's not meaningless. Your soul has already chosen when and how. And that choice was made with wisdom far beyond what your conscious mind can comprehend. This doesn't mean you become reckless. You still look both ways before crossing the street. You still see doctors. You still take care of your body. But you stop living in the paralyzing fear that death could strike randomly at any moment and destroy everything. Because it can't. Your death is already planned, already chosen, already perfect for your soul's needs. Second, you start living with purpose. If your soul chose to incarnate for specific reasons, if it chose this life, these challenges, these opportunities, then your job is to fully engage with all of it, to learn the lessons available, to complete the mission, to do the work you came here to do. This means stop wasting time on meaningless pursuits. Stop postponing what matters. Stop playing it safe when your soul is calling you to grow. You chose this life for a reason. Live it fully. Squeeze every drop of meaning and growth from every experience. Because that's what your soul wants. That's why it's here. Third, you approach tragedy differently. When loss happens, when death touches your life, instead of asking, why me? Why this? Why now? You can ask, what is this teaching? What is my soul learning? What is the soul of the person who died accomplishing through this exit? This doesn't eliminate grief. Grief is natural and necessary. But it transforms grief from something meaningless and crushing into something that has purpose, into a teacher, into an opportunity for profound growth. Fourth, you start honoring the deaths you witness. Instead of seeing them as failures or tragedies, you recognize them as completions, catalysts, or liberations. You understand that each death is exactly what that soul needed, and your role is not to judge or fix or prevent, but to bear witness, to support, to learn whatever lessons that death is teaching. Fifth, you live in the present moment with more intensity. Because if your soul chose this life, chose this body, chose these experiences for a limited time, then every moment is precious. Every interaction is meaningful. Every experience is exactly what you're supposed to be having. Stop waiting for life to begin. Stop postponing joy until conditions are perfect. This is it. This is the life your soul chose. These are the experiences it wanted. Be here now, fully, completely. Edgar Cayce taught that the fear of death is humanity's greatest prison. It keeps us small. It keeps us safe. It keeps us from taking the risks necessary for real growth. But when you understand that your soul chose your death with wisdom and purpose, that fear can dissolve. And what replaces it is freedom. The freedom to live boldly, to love deeply, to take risks, to pursue your calling, to say the things that need to be said, to heal the relationships that need healing, to do the work that only you can do. Because you're not here by accident. You chose this. Your soul chose this. And it chose it for reasons that will become clear when you die and experience the great remembering. Until then, your job is to trust the choice, to live the life, to complete the mission, to extract every lesson, every joy, every moment of growth from this incarnation. And when death comes, whether it's decades from now or sooner than you expect, you can face it knowing that it's exactly what your soul planned. that it's perfect, that it's the final sacred act of a life well lived. We've explored one of the most profound and challenging teachings that Edgar Cayce ever revealed, that your soul chose how you will die before you were born. We've learned about the Akashic records, where every life and death is recorded as patterns of energy and information accessible to those who can perceive beyond normal consciousness. We've discovered the reasons why a soul might choose its own death: karmic balance, soul group evolution, and accelerated spiritual growth. Not punishment, but education. Not cruelty, but wisdom. We've examined the three types of death: completion deaths, where the mission is accomplished; catalyst deaths, where one soul sacrifices to awaken others; and liberation deaths, where difficult circumstances lead to joyful release. We've learned about the great remembering, that moment at death when the veil lifts and you recall everything, understanding perfectly why you made the choices you made. And we've explored how this knowledge should change how we live, with less fear, more purpose, deeper presence, and absolute trust in the wisdom of the soul. This teaching is not meant to minimize the pain of loss or to suggest that grief is unnecessary. When someone you love dies, the pain is real, the grief is appropriate, the sense of loss is profound. But this teaching offers something that most philosophies cannot: meaning, purpose, understanding, the knowledge that even the most tragic death serves a higher purpose, that nothing is random, that every soul completes its mission in exactly the way it planned. Your soul is ancient. It has lived countless lifetimes. It has died countless deaths. And each death taught lessons that made it wiser, stronger, more evolved. This death, the one you will experience at the end of this current life, is already planned, already chosen, already perfect for what your soul needs to complete this incarnation and move forward in its eternal journey. You don't need to fear it. You don't need to resist it. You don't need to spend your life running from something that's been orchestrated with profound wisdom. What you need to do is live fully, boldly, authentically. Do the work you came here to do. Learn the lessons available in every experience. Love deeply. Grow constantly. Take the risks that your soul is calling you to take. Because when your death comes and you experience the great remembering, you'll see the perfection of it all. You'll understand why every experience, every challenge, every joy, every loss was exactly what you needed. You'll recognize the wisdom of the choices your soul made before birth. And you'll move forward into your next phase of existence with the deep satisfaction of a mission completed, a life well lived, a death perfectly timed. Edgar Cayce once said, "Death is not the opposite of life. It is the completion of it. And the soul that understands this lives without fear and dies without resistance." This is the gift of knowing that your soul chose your death. Not fear, not resignation, but freedom. The freedom to live each day as if it matters, because it does. The freedom to face mortality with peace because you know it's part of the plan. The freedom to trust that everything, even death, serves the highest good. Thank you for taking this profound journey with me. Thank you for having the courage to consider ideas that challenge everything our culture teaches about death. And if this has helped you see death differently, if it's given you more peace about your own mortality or about losses you've experienced, then share it. Because millions of people are living in fear of death, and that fear is preventing them from truly living. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these deep mysteries of consciousness, death, and the eternal nature of the soul. And remember, Your soul knows the way you will die. It chose that death with wisdom you cannot yet fully comprehend. Your job is not to fear it or prevent it or understand it. Your job is to live fully, fearlessly, completely, until the moment comes when you remember why you made the choice you made and you step through that doorway with recognition, understanding, and peace. See you in the next video.